This is Walk to Wealth, Episode 9. My name is John Mendez, and I am your host. Welcome to Walk to Wealth, where I motivate and inspire people new to the world of personal finance by letting you all in behind the scenes of someone who's still on his way. Thank you for tuning into today's episode. For all my new listeners, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that you can make it. For all the OGs in the building, welcome back home. Thank you for all the loyalty and all the support. In today's episode, we are going to be wrapping up my interview with Margaret Kozlark. There's going to be just as much gems, if not more, in this episode as there was the first. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
So anyway, so we're about to go full circle on this, but what I was going to say is even if you have a situation, you always have a safety net and a plan if stuff happens that's unexpected. Mm-hmm. And basically what you do is when you are looking at the numbers, you sort of keep a little bit aside every month for, just kind of as a safety net in case stuff comes up. So when those things happened, when we had the ice storm, when we had, the problem with the tornado, we were still able to, continue moving forward and operating the asset. And now we're going to be, exiting it next week with a profit.
That sounds like a great idea. It kind of seems like if your investment just constantly just keeps on pushing through no matter what's going on.
Well, yes. And the one thing I didn't mention too is you have to be really careful about what you invest in. So for us, we were looking at different asset classes, and I'll get into what that means in a minute. But we like to look at apartment buildings that have at least 100 units that are usually in those Sunbelt states, as I mentioned. We want areas that have a population growth, right? So people are moving to the area because if people are moving, they need a place to live. Mm-hmm. We like an area that has job diversification. So lots of different employers. So like, I wouldn't want to do military, for example, because if I, let's say, invested in Norfolk, Virginia, and the government decides to close the military base there, well, the whole economy could fall apart, or like what happened in Detroit, right? Stuff like that. And then we like to do what's called Class B. So every property has different levels of classes. Class A is like the super high end, like really upscale property. Class B is just kind of like still nicer areas, kind of like where your basic, middle class, folks live. Mm-hmm. Class C is decent, but sometimes the area might be a little tired. And then when you're getting down to Class D and below, sometimes these are properties who are in areas that might be considered, a little bit like with higher crime rate, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I don't like to invest in those areas. For a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't want to invest in a property where I have to worry about if somebody's going to take the copper pipes or if there's going to be any kind of, crime or violence going on in the area. Yeah. We like Class B because these are the cops and the teachers and the firefighters, and these are like the hearts of the community.
Yeah.
So we try to find a property that we try to find it off market, so we're not competing with other buyers. And then we try to find a property that's a little tired. Right. So maybe the kitchens and bathrooms are like 20 years old and they're ready for an update. Yeah. Or, maybe the driveway needs to be paved or, there's some maintenance that needs to be done. So that's what's called a value add. So we'll go and make those changes and we've immediately improved the value of that property by doing that.
And then, so it kind of just amazes me how like all this stuff kind of goes on behind the scenes. And like most people will never, ever hear about any of this stuff. And it's very beneficial to have people like you in my life that can, teach me things like this and will teach our audience as well. Because if you don't know what you don't know, for lack of a better way to put it. And it's like the barrier to entry to this is so high that most people might not ever even know what's out there. So it's like you can't even have an aiming point because it's like there's nothing to aim at unless you actually know someone that's already has their feet in the game.
And that's it, John. It's not even just a financial barrier of entry. If you've never even heard of this, you don't even know what's possible, right? Like you don't even know that, like, I'm sure most people thought it was big institutions that own apartment buildings. And technically they're LLCs, but they're most often owned by investors like you and me. But people just don't know that, they think it's just like Wall Street, and Wall Street does own a fair amount, but there's investors that own them as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so with your syndication thing, so what is Noblevest? What got you that name?
Yes.
How do you come up with all of that?
So I had my own investment company for years called MGH Investments, which was Maeve Grace Henry for my 3 kids. And, I was kind of doing it on the side, but, as I was getting older, I'm like, I really need to kind of devote more time for this. But, I like to say that Noblevest is building my long-term wealth. And then working as a real estate agent is, my income. It's what pays the bills. And, it's the money that I spend now so that I can take my investment money and save it for later. And so a couple of years ago, I connected with a woman who used to work in market research, Christine Shu. And ironically, we didn't know each other at the time. We were both from the same industry, but, our values and our goals really aligned. And so she and I decided to form Noblevest together. So I closed my other business and we became Noblevest this past November. And basically it stands for Noble Investing, because I think when people think about investing, you either think about, some like old white guy up in like Wall Street and like you can't even relate to this person and he's super greedy, right? And he's maybe he's fleecing his employees for everything he can. But the bulk of the people really just want to build their wealth for noble reasons, right? Maybe they want to send their kids to college. Maybe they have a special needs child, as I do. Maybe they, have elderly parents who are getting older, or maybe they want to volunteer or, do some charity, so like there are noble reasons why people may want to grow their wealth. And so it's kind of like our way of saying it's okay to want to be wealthy and we can help you do this, in an ethical way. Because we're never going to buy a property and then like jack up the rent and give nothing to the land, to the tenants and just be horrible landlords and soak everything that we can out of them and then sell it like as a shell 3 years later. That is not how we do business. So that's sort of what Noble is. Noble Investing.
Yeah, and I love your mission behind what you got going on, because like a lot of people think that to have money is evil and stuff. And one of the mindset tips I gave in, I think it was episode 2 of my podcast, it's like that, money can't be the root of all evil. Because if you actually start looking into history, right, money hasn't even been around for that long compared to humans. Yeah. So, and it's safe to say that, we've been having a bunch of things going on wrong for like pretty much all of time, and so it's like the fact that people try to pinpoint that to money and make money the cause. It's like, regardless of whether, you're religious or you're scientific or anywhere in between, it's like money, like a standard form of currency hasn't even been, I think the first civilization that had it was, I think in Babylon, I believe, or around that time period, somewhere in like several thousand BC. And so it's like, a lot of people have this misconception that money is evil. And I love that you brought up the fact about the 1%ers. And so do you know how much it takes to be considered a 1%er in globally?
I don't know, actually. I don't know that amount.
What would you guess if you had to take a random guess?
You know what? I know it's lower than we think. I want to say globally, it might be less than $100,000.
Yeah, so you're kind of close. So it's $39,000 US. That's part of the 1% globally.
It's insane.
And so it's like, the whole idea behind people with money are evil. It's like when you depending on who you're comparing yourself to, like if you're comparing yourself to a celebrity, like, who makes like, Jeff Bezos or stuff like that. Yeah, they're the 1%, but most U.S. citizens, I think the average income is like close to like 50,000, something like that. Most U.S. citizens are the 1% to people in other countries. So it's ironic that, a convenient argument to say blame all your issues on the 1% when it's like you're the 1% to everyone else not here.
Well, and I think, look, there's always going to be people who have wealth and they misuse it, right? They might use it for ill-gotten gains or they wield it over someone or try to control somebody. I mean, there's going to be people who are misbehaving in any walk of life, whether you have money or not. Money doesn't buy happiness, as they say, but what? It can ease a lot of stress and can ease a lot of anxiety. If it's something that you don't have to worry about and you can focus on your kids or focus on your family or focus on doing something that you love to do, it sure makes things a lot easier. You know what I mean? So there's nothing wrong with wanting. I think if you asked everybody, everybody would like to feel, to wake up in the morning and not have to think about, whatever their bills might be, whether it's how am I going to buy this yacht or how am I going to put food on the table. Everybody's got some sort of, I guess, relationship with money.
Exactly. And I love that you said that, money doesn't buy happiness. And that's true because a lot of people are using that money to only buy materialistic things, right? So if you use your money to, pay for your kids' schooling or pay for, your kids', AAU travel teams, or in my situation, if you use money to, set up that in your passion, whether you want to do, I have a lot of friends that do music. If you had the money, unlimited amounts of money to just, fund your studio costs and stuff like that. And it's like not having to work to pursue your passions, or being able to pursue your passions, regardless of how much you get paid, knowing that in the background, you have money coming in. Right. It's like, I genuinely believe, and that's kind of my reasoning behind starting the podcast. It's like, if everyone was at least financial and independent, to the point where bills and groceries and clothes, that was covered. Right. And clothes, the necessity, not designer clothes, obviously. I genuinely feel like this world would be a better place. And even if you don't want to become an accredited investor, if you start aiming to become an accredited investor, you could stop anywhere along the way. Let's say you only need $40,000 a year, to live a happy, sustainable life. Find a way to get enough rental properties or investments or crypto or whatever your asset class of choice may be, to get that $40,000 a year passively. Mm-hmm. That way you could do whatever you want.
Yeah.
If you'd like to make a couple of million a year passively, then you might have to start scaling a little bit higher. But it's set a goal. And then if you set that goal high enough, if you realize somewhere along the way, it's you don't need that much money or you don't want that much money, then by all means, you could always just stop right there. And because you have enough money to cover everything you need already, from there, your choice to continue or stop is really an option. You have more options.
It is. And, I think it comes down to, John, that if you think about it, most people we don't talk about money. Yeah. Right. So when you were growing up, I don't know about you, my parents didn't talk about money except occasionally how they didn't have money for something or they had to budget for something else. It was always something that, was a struggle, or, what are we going to put the money to this week? And I grew up in a middle-class family. I mean, we weren't we weren't rolling in the dough, but we weren't struggling either. But there was always something that there was a management problem, right? How to manage the money. And I don't understand why we don't teach money management in school. So one of my long-term goals with Noblevest is I would really like to develop a program, maybe in middle school, but probably high school, just teaching people about money. Yeah. And they have a version of it now where it's you can pick what stocks to invest in the stock market, and that's fine. But I'm talking about something more global, right? How to balance a checkbook, how to, look at your paycheck and figure out where it's going, how to do a budget and how to grow. And, credit cards, right? Credit cards are easy money, but do people really understand how predatory some of that interest can be? Some my daughters, when they turned 18, they started getting all these cards in the mail, hey, you're 18, sign up for this credit card, right? Because everybody wants to build a credit history. Mm-hmm. But I'm looking at this and I'm this is a 35% annual interest. Yeah. What? You're not signing up for this. But these companies, they can be very predatory. And if you're not looking at the details, you can get yourself in trouble. So it would be great for people to know what to look for. But then on the flip side, we all hear about how debt is so bad and consumer debt, meaning credit card debt, is terrible. But there is debt that can be good for you. So for example, when you have a rental property, you're in debt, right? Because you took a mortgage out to buy that property, but you're borrowing the bank's money to make money. Kind of like I said with you, let's say I have a loan and I have to pay $700 a month on the loan. If you're paying me $1,200, I'm using the bank's money to buy that house, but I'm making $500 a month. I'm making money by borrowing somebody else's money. So in that case, debt isn't bad. It's good. You just have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing too, I like that you brought up credit cards. So for me, I never really knew much about credit cards at all. Yeah. And but as some of the people that are listening know, I'm really big into the points and miles game. I'm actually at this point in time, I just had once I bought my car, I used the down payment to finish the rest of my welcome bonus. So after that welcome bonus comes in, I think I'm going to have somewhere close to around like, I think like 250,000 points as of the
That's
time of
awesome.
recording this. And it's like, but that's only because I went out and researched the information. And like, so now I'm at a point in, where like I have so much credit card knowledge. I don't look at interest rates because the way I use credit cards, I use them just as if they were debit cards.
Yes. So yeah,
And
that's
so
fine
it's
because you're
like,
paying them. Yeah.
so I learned how to game the system. But it's like,
Yes.
as you said, because a lot of this stuff isn't talked about, it's so easy. And I kind of had to figure this out on my own. I talked about this on my podcast too. So the very first month, so my first credit card that I ever got was a Bank of America card. This is before I became like savvy with personal finance. And I kind of opened it and there's this credit builder app called Self that I recommended for a lot of my listeners. And I kind of used those two to start building up my credit. And I just bought like little things every month. And Self is like you pay every month, and at the end of your term, they give you pretty much all your money back minus the interest. It's just to say you made monthly payments on time, and it shows up as an installment loan on your credit card. I mean, on your credit report. But 6 months after I opened up, my first credit card, I got my first Chase card, right? And I got carried away with the hitting the welcome bonus, and I was like, I think $3 away from maxing out that card. Granted, I had money in reserves, so I paid it off still at the end of the month in full. But it's like it's very easy to get carried away. And me, I was learning on my own at the time, so it's like I had to learn it a little bit at the hard way, and my credit score dropped a little bit because of that. But it was a learning experience, and I very much learned from that. And now I'm in a point in time where it's like from that and a couple other experiences that taught me a lot. It's like now it's like the points and miles game. It's like I'm churning out these cars and like really gaming the system, because at the end of the day, once you get to a point where it's like you know so much about a certain topic, and for you, I'm pretty sure it's the same with your syndications, like and your tax strategies that to
I didn't even talk about depreciation. I'll have to get to that. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's all kind of a game. It's just like I always felt as if the system that everyone like hates, the oppressive system that we all live in. It's like, there's two ways to be successful in this country, right? It's either you take the time to learn the system, or you find the people that do. And those are the only two routes that you can take. Yes. And if you don't like the game, you could try and completely, change the rules, but it's like, it's either you learn the game or you find someone that does, and then you hang out with them. And that's kind of what I'm doing by, interviewing you and other people as well, and doing learning on my own as well. It's
like, sorry about the dog. Yeah. Well, and 100% is really guard your mindset, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's a mindset about money or even just life in general, for whatever reason, we are a society that really likes to complain. Right? Yeah. Like if you go on social media at any given time, somebody's complaining about the traffic or the politician, or why, this store's hours changed, or, this traffic light's too slow, or whatever it is. Like there's always endless number of things. People almost bond over it, right? Like they just, they're complaining and that's how they're bonding. But I really believe in the law of attraction. So like you're going to attract to you what you're bringing. So like, even if it's just, if you've ever heard like somebody say, oh man, great. And then I was late for work. And then of course, with my luck, I had to be behind the guy, with the tractor trailer not moving. And then of course it was the day I had this thing that I was supposed to do. And I'm thinking, stop, you're bringing that onto yourself, stop focusing on what you don't want and focus on what you do. So a very easy tip for anybody, I don't care your age, your income, whatever you are, is guard your thoughts and focus on what you want. And that could be something as simple as, instead of saying, oh my gosh, I can't be late. I don't want to be late. I don't want to be late. I want to be on time. I'm going to be on time. Focus on what you want. Don't talk about what you don't want, right? Focus on what you want. And then the stars will align and the traffic will open. I know it sounds cheesy, but I'm telling you, it has worked for me so many times. You just focus on what you want and everything aligns and it works out. But if you're going to focus on what you don't want, you're going to get more of the same.
Yeah. And then I love that you said that too, because for me, once so it's about this November 2020, that's when I went to Barnes & Noble and I picked up my first 3 books, right? Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I'll Teach You to Be Rich. And
that's a good one.
And
Think and Grow Rich?
Yeah.
Did
no, I Will Teach You to Be Rich.
Okay.
And then Index Funds for Dummies. Those are my 3 books I picked up.
Yeah.
That was in November of 2020. Once January 2021 came about, I'm already kind of learning. I'm on this journey. I already opened up my first Chase card. So I'm already starting to become a lot more aware of like the personal finance world and teaching myself.
Right.
From that point on, I decided, and I think it was it might have been December of 2020. I don't think the new year came about. I deleted all my social media, Instagram, Facebook, it's like Snapchat.
That's
like,
smart, John, because they'll suck up a lot of your time. And you'll be like, where did that hour just go that I've been scrolling like a zombie through this phone?
Exactly. And so for me, like I wanted to get into real estate. So I told myself all the time, it's like, I will not download social media again until I get my license and I become an agent. And then I ended up becoming an agent about 9-10 months later. So like for that 9-10 month period, I was pretty much a ghost to most people that know me. No one ever seen me. I didn't exist for a little while because I was not on any social media at all. And
I think that is so smart because, social media at its, at a very base level, first of all, it's going to suck up so much of your time and you're not even going to know it. You know what I mean? There are some good things about it. So for instance, if you're back on social media, there's a ton of amazing investment groups that I can recommend to you or anybody else who's interested. Spend your time in those groups, right? Spend your time networking with people who are like-minded like you, who are looking to get educated, who are looking to improve their, status in life or, build their wealth or whatever it might be. And just by association, you're going to learn a lot, right? And I will also say it's really interesting because real estate, at least on the residential real estate side, can be very competitive, which part of me never really understands because I know there's a lot of people out there who are real estate agents, but there's a ton of houses out there too, right? Like there's plenty for everybody.
I think there's like 6 houses for every one agent.
Absolutely. So, but multifamily, it's got such an abundance mindset where people are so generous and they will reach out, help people. Oh, you're interested in doing this? Sure. Let me help you. Hey, this person, it can be a good person for you to know. You may want to listen to this podcast, whatever it is. And it's sort of like that whole rising tide raises all ships.
Yeah.
Everybody is just out there helping each other. And it's just a really nice community to be in. So talk afterwards on some suggestions.
Definitely. And so as we get closer to wrapping up, what's your call to action that you want to give out to everyone listening right now that right after they listen to this podcast, they can get into doing?
You got to think big. Okay. Do not limit yourself and think. I think it's Tony Robbins who says, just come up with a big, hairy, audacious goal, right? Like maybe your goal is that, you're 20 years old and you want to get a job and make 50,000. Why? Decide you want to make 150,000, take whatever you want and just supersize it, because you can do it. You just have to keep focused and just keep focusing and focusing. I'm a big believer in vision boards. So if you literally lay out what you want, even if it's just, let's say I don't even know if this exists, but let's say you do a cutout and you make yourself a $300,000 bill, right? Just even if you color it and you stick it on your ceiling or maybe on your nightstand, and every morning when you wake up, you look at it, and every morning before you go to bed, and you just imagine that that's you or that's your bank account. And you just start getting into that mindset and things start to place for you to kind of get there.
Yeah. And to tag on to that, it's you're for everyone listening, your brain doesn't know the difference between what is reality and what is just your imagination. So it's like you convince yourself to believe that that's your reality, then your brain starts to carry itself as if that's already happening. Yeah. And it's like, then because you're carrying yourself as it's already happening, slowly but surely, you'll start attracting the things that will make you get to that end goal that you wanted to achieve in your mind. So it's like, that's super important that you first see it in your mind before you actually go about doing it, and you really imprint that idea into your mind. And so,
and don't be focused on whatever challenges you may have in your life, right? Because everybody has something, right? Maybe you're a single mom, or, maybe you kind of had a rough childhood, or maybe you're, have a situation in life that you're not happy with, right? So use those things to propel you, right? So like, don't make it define who you are. So like, again, just another quick Tony Robbins story. I went to a conference of his years ago, and he told the story about how when he was young, and obviously Tony Robbins is like a gazillionaire, right? But when he was young, he came from a broken home. You know, his mom was a drug user. He had like 4 different dads, but by the time he was like 10 years old, he had like some kind of growth disorder, which is why he's such a big guy. And he, you know, there was never any food. And he said he remembered one Thanksgiving, this guy showed up at his door with like this basket of food. And Tony Robbins like, no, I don't want this. And he goes, hey man, I'm just the delivery guy. And he, from that moment on, he was like, you know what? That's what I want to do sometime. I want to like get to be successful, and I want to be that guy showing up at people's houses, even though he would be the one buying the food, just being like, hey, I'm just the delivery guy. Mm-hmm. So the point is, he grew up, he got into this whole mindset stuff. He met a guy named Jim Rohn, who's passed away, but was very much into mindset. Mm-hmm. And he formed this alliance with Feeding America. And he has given a percentage of his earnings over the years to Feeding America. And whether you like Tony Robbins or not, you know, he's definitely helped feed many, many people. And so he says, if I didn't have that crappy childhood, and if I didn't know what it felt like to be hungry, I would have never been propelled to grow up and make sure that another kid didn't feel that way. Mm. So like he took his pain and he used it to benefit millions of others by like using that to drive him. So you can have, if you have something that's going on in your life that's rough, you can use it to be like, poor me. Of course they can do it. She can do it. You know, she had that corporate background or whatever. Everybody has stuff, right? Just use it to push you forward. Don't use it as an excuse to keep yourself down.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the fact that you quote Jim Rohn. I still listen to his interviews and his YouTube.
I love that you know who Jim Rohn is.
Yeah, all the time. Sometimes in the morning, I'll just throw on a YouTube little Jim Rohn speech.
Yes.
And, one of the things, you know, because as I said, the podcast is called A Walk to Wealth. So it's like not about getting the $1 million. It's about the person you become in order to get that $1 million. And once you become that, once you become the person who is a millionaire, whether you lose your first million or even your second million, even if you lose $10 million, the money will always come back because you have become the person who is a millionaire.
Yes.
It's about the person you become along the journey that people, and people don't stop to smell the roses while they're on their walk to wealth. And Margaret, as we start wrapping up, you know, where could we get in touch with you? Where could we find you?
So you can find me over here at Margaret at Noblevest.com. I'm not sure if you can see my email there.
Yeah.
But, or go to Noblevest.com if you're interested in learning more about syndication. We have a whole bunch of great blog posts there. We've got a good newsletter if you want to just sign up and sort of read about it. And you know, we're on Facebook. We are on LinkedIn. We've got an Instagram account, and we're just always, you know, just posting about, you know, different things in the multifamily space, as well as other asset classes, you know, which are things like self-storage or car washes or short-term rentals, which are things like Airbnbs. There's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of really interesting things out there that you can invest your money in. But the best thing that you're doing, and I would totally recommend anybody listening to do this, John, is that you are investing in yourself in terms of education. You went out and you bought those 3 books, but you know what? You could go to the library and get them. You don't even have to spend that money, right? These resources, there's a ton of stuff available on the internet for free. Go out and get educated. That alone will do so much towards helping you feel confident and more prepared to really, you know, make these decisions and grow your wealth and think big. Don't think too small. Think big.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if nobody in your house went to college. It doesn't matter if everybody has struggled with money. That doesn't mean that you can't do it.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. And so the last 5 questions I got for you, have the fast 5 here is, you know, way we end up every interview. And so the very first question, this is all going to be rapid fire, right? Who is your favorite music artist?
Probably Springsteen.
Springsteen. Okay.
Yeah.
What is your favorite condiment?
Gosh, that's interesting. I guess ketchup.
Ketchup? Okay. Can't go wrong with ketchup.
Yeah. It's boring, but yeah.
favorite pizza topping?
Ooh. Sausage and pepper.
Sausage and pepper. Okay. Yeah. What was your favorite show growing up?
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this, which one was it? There were so many of them. I think I would say I Love Lucy, which, by the way, I was not alive when it was on in prime time, just for the record. But when I was growing up, they used to have it on reruns all the time. So like I would come home from school and they would have like I Love Lucy and the Brady Bunch and all those old shows.
Yeah.
And I loved it. It was just so fun. And, and I introduced my kids to it today and they love it as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last question is, if you were a DJ, what would your DJ name be?
Oh my gosh. I would probably say Mags 21.
DJ Mags 21. I know. Alrighty. Any reason behind the name?
Well, people used to call me Magpie when I was young. So a lot of times one of my handles was Mags, like Magz, and 21st is just my birthday. So that was always my name, Mags 21.
Alrighty, Margaret. Well, Margaret, I just want to thank you very much for being my very first podcast guest.
Thank you so much.
Definitely love to have you
honored.
on again in the future. Definitely, I think the audience will definitely be able to take away a lot from this episode and start thinking big and, seeing that there's a lot more out there that most people never learn about. And so it's like, I'm glad that you were able to hop on and, just open our eyes to, what's to come if we, head down this road of investing and keep on progressing.
And that is what it's all about. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, certainly if anybody's interested in learning about this, happy to have a conversation. If you are a real estate agent, there are massive tax benefits that you can get from investing in real estate. I actually meant to mention that early. So definitely let's talk, because it's amazing. I think only 9% of realtors actually own rental property or invest in real estate. And we should change that, realtors, because you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
And one more thing for realtors, the average net worth of realtors is $0. I think we should start changing that. We should be the change that we want to see.
Gandhi, love that. One of my favorite quotes. 100%. Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end it there. So Margaret, again, thank you for coming on, and just thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, John. Take care, everybody.
Take care. I hope you guys were able to have just as much fun, if not more, listening to the podcast as I had actually interviewing Margaret. I hope you guys were able to take away some solid golden nuggets that you'll be able to not only probably put into action after listening to this interview, but hopefully you'll get to some inspiration as to goals that you can aspire to in the near future, whether that ends up being syndications, or that inspires you to take a different route, or that just inspires you to think bigger in whatever route you want to take. This definitely is a great interview to go back and listen to again. Thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode. Again, I am your host, John Mendez. You can find me at JohnMendez_realtor and at Walk to Wealth on Instagram. Please make sure to subscribe and leave a review if you're loving the podcast so far. New episodes are released every Sunday. Look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode. Take care.